infrastructure here in the face of that apparent shortage?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I believe that there's a number of things we can do. We actually have to put more funding into training and education, and both for the employed and unemployed. And I think in your opening statement, you noted something, a phenomenon that is going on here that is also coming up very, very quickly. It is what we call the silver tsunami, and that's the fact that I'm a boomer, like many people around here, and we're out of the workforce very, very soon. So that's a real challenge. At the same time, we have denigrated manufacturing in such a way that it's not attractive for young people to go in, and frankly, there haven't been jobs here, and we've lost millions in the last number of months in manufacturing. So that we've got to get around those impediments. And investments in that and our training and our technical education system are part of that puzzle. There's another part, too, that really has to make sure that we've got employers adequately investing in the training and the education of their workforce, too. It's not an either-or, that they're just doing it or that the educational system is just responsible for it, but it's what both of them are doing together at the same time.
Thank you. Yeah, we're in the process of reauthorizing the Workforce Investment Act, and this is a major part of just how do we get that cooperative effort between labor, industry, academia, technical schools, and things of that nature to get this turned around. One of the issues that we have, not just here, but also in energy technology and other areas, is getting the industries to spend the time and the effort and delegate the personnel to identify the standard of quality they need out of workers. You know, what are the standards? What do they need to know to come in as a base level into your corporation that you can then take from there and apply that to whatever it is you do, and then determining who's going to write the curriculum and where. Is it going to be a technical school? Is it going to be at a community college? Is it going to be at a four-year college? Is it going to be some private vendor on that, and get that working on that gear? So if any of you have any comments or improvements you think we can have as we reflect on that, I'd like to hear it. If not now, I'm certainly accept it in writing later. And Mr. Gordon, I know you want to say something.
Yeah, I did want to bring up one thing, just in terms of the first question and how we're going to get in there and whether people are interested in it. Well, there was a PricewaterhouseCoopers survey on manufacturing about 6 months ago, and while in the high 70s and 80s, everybody agreed that manufacturing was important, it had good jobs, and it was great for national security, only 30% of those same people said that they would recommend that somebody in their family went into manufacturing. That's the problem. They believe that there's no future in it, or that it's one of the 3 Ds. It's dull, it's dirty, or it's dangerous. If people understood in this country that it's a very, very clean, safe, and enjoyable and creative career, I think you would have more people going into it and more families pushing them into it. And I think that an advertising campaign, much like U.S. Army or the Navy, where, you know, soldier of one, high tech, that's the kind of thing that will get people involved in it and say, I'm going to be part of building this nation.
Mr. Lickmeyer, you have any further questions? Mr. Murphy, recognized.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, on the workforce issue, I would just note I was visiting another company in my district, a district that has 9–10% unemployment, an advanced manufacturing aerospace company who has had a help wanted sign out for months now because they can't find the type of tooling expertise that they need, even though we have an enormous amount of our manufacturing workforce base out of work. We don't have the high-skilled type of workers that they need. Mike, just one remaining question, and I'll maybe pose it to you, Mr. Foe, but also to Mr. Baugh as well, is this: how do we assess the true price of a particular contract when we are looking at a domestic supplier and a foreign supplier? Right now, the price is simply the contract price, that we will buy it overseas if it is a certain percentage cheaper than the contract that is offered to us by a domestic supplier. And though that certainly is an accurate assessment for a private company who's only responsible for paying the bill that they get sent, the U.S. government, I think, has a different calculation because that contract being awarded overseas and by extrapolation, a job being lost in a U.S. manufacturing plant and then gained in a foreign manufacturing plant has other costs to the U.S. government. At the top of the list, obviously, the lost payroll taxes, the lost income taxes, and then the increased social safety net costs of unemployment compensation and the like. So I guess it's a loaded question to an extent, but the question is, right now, we seem to simply award based on contract cost with no holistic understanding of the full cost of moving that contract overseas. How do we get, if we should make a change, and maybe I'm prejudging your response, but should we make a change, and if we should, How do you make that change, given the fact that we have the Department of Defense making those decisions?
Well, clearly we need to make that change because that's basically at the heart of what we've been talking about all morning. The social costs, not simply the employment costs and the costs of government programs, but the long-term costs to the economic health of the United States are not included in that contract, even though the United States is the contractor. And the problem is no one is responsible for that. And for those in the government who care, and there are people who care, they have no access to the levers of power that would change that calculation. So the short answer is we don't have the calculation. We know that there are huge costs out there and huge benefits, and historically, as I said before you came, there's plenty of history here. But we need to elevate that question to the highest levels of this government and public discussion, because we have found that leaving it to the Department of Defense, leaving it to the Treasury Department, leaving it to the GAO, who are not mandated to make that calculation, simply puts us back into this simple, narrow, and destructive, obsessed with price issue.
So, and historically, we've done that by some, fairly inartful requirements. 50% content from the United States with certain percentages of waivers, a percentage above cost that allows you above the contract offered in the United States that gets you out of that Buy American clause. Is there a different way to force a calculation of the true cost to the U.S. economy? Is there a way to, for instance, add on a percentage increase to a foreign contract that accounts for all of those lost taxes and increased government costs to that job moving overseas? Is there just a different way of calculating the costs that we're not looking at today?
Yes, there's a different way, and the history of the literature on tariff economics is full of formula and theoretical discussions on that. But I think our history shows that the most important thing was a change in the consciousness of the people writing those contracts and an understanding that there is this larger national interest floating on top of that contract. And historically, we have been successful when, from at the very top of Congress and the executive branch, that message has gotten to the civil service and the people making those contracts. So it's not just, how do I figure this out? It's my job is to figure this out. And if that's their job, the formula will come.
Thank you very much. I have one last question. We talked about the rare earth minerals and metals on that, and China having 97% of that market. Is there a possibility or a likelihood that the United States could get some of that market back, and do we have the wherewithal to do it, and what time frame are we talking about getting to that if we were to start today? Mr. Wessel.
Well, first of all, as you may know, about 2 weeks ago, the steelworkers filed a trade case regarding the alternative and renewable energy sector. One of the 5 areas of action within that is to address China's actions and policies in the rare earth minerals area, which are clearly a WTO violation. So number one is to open up the market so we'll be able to get it. Number 2, there are efforts to reopen mines here in the U.S. There's a mine that is presently under discussion for California, as I recall, right near the Nevada border. There has not, because of the uncertainty in the market for so long, it hasn't been worthwhile to do it. Now that China is doing this, has been withholding so much, it's becoming economic to do it here again. But as I believe Mr. Lukemeyer may have said, it's going to take 15 years not only to get the mine back and operating, but also to be able to transform those items into products that we can use in the clean and green chain, in JDAMs and everything else. So we can take action, but the first thing is we have to get China to change its policies.
Great, thank you. If there's anybody on the panel that believes we haven't addressed a matter that needs attention, I would like to give you one opportunity to state that for us. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. Mr. Foe?
Just a quick footnote on the training question. One of the problems here is credibility. For the last 20 years, with the government and other leaders have been telling young people that get into computers, get into this sort of technology, get into that. And it turns out that in many of these areas, the supply of workers is much greater than demand. So there's a confidence issue both in the labor market, that is to make it clear to people that there's government policy to create those jobs and to create a dynamic sector, both for the labor market and for the financial markets to get the investment.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Gordon?
Yeah, I'd like to add one other comment on Representative Murphy's interest in how you add costs or take into account offshoring. Right now in federal procurement policy, you have a source selection criteria, and that source selection criteria does not allow for you to understand what happens or take into account what happens to domestic manufacturing capabilities. That means that a program manager that is making those decisions is not allowed, even if he understands those consequences, is not allowed to make a decision for a domestic versus an offshore supplier, and that is a barrier to making that right decision. The Aerospace Industries Association has an industrial base report that they put out that said we should add what happens to industrial capabilities on the domestic front as a source selection criteria when it's defense essential needs. And that would take care of that.
I would also add the same point. We've suggested over and over that we really do have sort of a social impact cost on these things, about the employment side, the income side, which you've been getting to with your question, Mr. Murphy. And frankly, I would note that the industrial policies of most of our competitors, whether they're communist or whether they're democratic societies, they actually do have strategies for manufacturing, and it's based upon the desire to have employment and income and technology in their society and to be making those things. We're the only ones that really don't. So it's not just about twisting ourselves into a pretzel to find a cost accounting mechanism to get to it. It is also about the broader overview of how we think about manufacturing. It's not just the consumer interest. There is a vast society interest and an employment and income interest.
Thank you. Mr. Wessel?
Just quickly, many years ago there was a bill called the Save American Jobs Act, which looked at the offshoring or outsourcing of production and basically said, we are going to look at the cost that you were leaving behind. So if a company is going to look at moving its operations or sourcing offshore, the public has a right to know what costs are being left behind, whether it's diminution of the tax base, whether it's unemployment benefits, welfare, or anything else. And there is a way of doing that to look almost at a severance tax, if you will, if you're going to pick up and leave, and which could be done in the defense area as well. And so when the internal rate of return is looked at by a company as to what their return is when they move operations, they're going to have to factor in the cost of those people that they leave behind. And that's something I would suggest be looked at. It hasn't been brought up in many years.
I want to thank all of our witnesses again for your testimony. It's been extremely helpful to us, and I hope that this is not the last hearing that we have on this issue, and we like to give a little bit of impetus to our colleagues in other committees to get moving on this, as well as the White House, and thank my colleagues and staff as well. Meeting adjourned.